Hello everyone, welcome back to Too Sweet MTG, and welcome to part 1 of our Phyrexia All Will Be One cube review. Today we're going to be looking at white, blue, black and red, and then in episode 2, which will come out shortly, we'll be looking at everything else. I'm once again joined by the lovely James. James, how's it going?
Pretty good. We've got some pretty dope magic cards to talk about, so yeah, excited to go.
Yeah, there's a lot of cool and interesting stuff from this set.
Yeah, so it's always interesting picking which cards we're going to talk about here. Obviously, we can't talk about all of them. Some of the things we tend to shy away from are mechanics where you need a really big critical mass and they're a bit parasitic. So some of it, we're not really going to be talking about the toxic cards in terms of you have loads of them and there's a whole toxic deck. Obviously, that's a thing you can put in your cube. And if you do, you probably need almost all of them because it's something where you can't have like 3 toxic cards in your deck and have it be good. You need like 10. And that's quite hard for most cubes. So I think we'll be picking out the good toxic cards when they're just good cards, but we're not going to be really talking about the toxic deck in this review, I think.
Yeah, exactly. Like there's some cards that have toxic, but kind of they feed and power themselves. If the card can be self-contained, then we'll talk about it. But yeah, as James has said, yeah, if it needs a whole 20 other cards to make it work, it's probably not going to be spoken about, unfortunately, in this video.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's tempting to think there's a lot of overlap with Infect. I think in lots of ways there isn't actually, because Infect tends to want combat tricks and Toxic does not work with combat tricks. It says you get a fixed amount of poison damage regardless of the power of the creature. So I think, yeah, it really needs to be its own deck, and I think that's not going to be the case in most cubes.
Yeah, completely agree. All right, so James, you want to take it away with our first white card?
Yeah, so we're starting off with Elish Norn, Mother of the Machines, which is one of the big face mythics of the set. It is 4 and a white for a 4/7 legendary creature Phyrexian Praetor. It has vigilance, and if a permanent entering the battlefield causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. So similar text what you know from Panharmonicon. And permanents entering the battlefield don't cause abilities of permanents your opponents control to trigger. So you get double ETBs, your opponent gets no ETBs at all. Definitely had a lot of hype around this card for Commander. I kind of think that is where the hype should stay for this card. I think 5 mana for this effect in cube is pretty steep. The fact that you need to play this card, untap with this card, and have more gas is pretty tough on a 5-drop, in my opinion. So obviously you need to be in some sort of blink ETB effect deck. I think if you compare this to something like Yorion in that deck, I'd rather have Yorion every time. Because Yorion, I can play out all of my good ETB creatures first, play my Yorion, I'll get like 2 or 3 ETB effects, and that's probably enough. Whereas with this card, like, sure, the dream is maybe bigger, where you get to, like, you play this, you play your Ephemerate, you start flickering stuff, it could be incredible. But you only need enough to win you the game. This isn't Commander. You don't need to beat 3 people. You just need to beat your opponent. And, like, generally the one Yorion, if you have enough ETB creatures, is good for that. Whereas this is, like, not a good top deck. So it doesn't inherently cause anything to trigger. It's just a big dude. And I don't think you need it. Sure, it's 7 toughness, it's hard to kill, but it's a lot of removal on cube that kills even big creatures. What do you think?
No, I completely agree. I think the conversation of kind of this being busted in Commander and this being average in Cube, I think I think it's pretty spot on. Kind of in Commander, there's more, like, generally people want to get their value straight away because things like board wipes are more prevalent in that kind of format because of it being multiplayer. In Cube, ETBs are good, but there's less of them, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
You want to run cards with like good, like, activated abilities, or sometimes just good aggressive cards. This is in white. A lot of white decks just don't want this kind of effect. With the flicker thing, where this is strongest, I don't think they want this. Wouldn't you just rather have another strong enter the battlefield creature, or just a smaller, or like a cheaper blink effect, like something like that? Like for 5 mana, I don't think this gets their 4 cube.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, there will be, I suppose one thing to say for it is there'll be matchups where it's really good, right? Like probably against other white decks where like their removals like O-Ring or
Hmm.
ECD, stuff like that. Like when it's turning off your opponent's triggers in a very meaningful way as well, maybe it gets fair. But I don't think it's a 5 drop. You don't want to be including it as a sideboard card, really. So yeah, I'd pass on that one, I think.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think if you compare it to some of the other 5 drops that kind of cubes can look to run, like you're going to run Solitude over this. You're going to run like Archangel of Thune. Even if you don't have combos, you run Archangel of Thune over this. I think there's just other things I think that people want more. And yeah, for that reason, I don't think Elish Norman will get into the bulk of like your average any kind of stock cube for like modern legacy or vintage. Maybe if like Flicker and Enter Battlefield, like if that is the theme of your cube,
Yeah, for sure.
but then you're kind of getting at the a niche point, and then kind of any card can be niche enough to get into a certain thing like that.
And I suppose it's maybe worth mentioning, but some people do build cubes with the intention of there's not loads of cheap removal and combos, and it's more of a like battle cruisery style of Magic, where people are trying to just like do the biggest thing. And in that spot, it's probably really good. It gets loads of value, right? But yeah, I think in typical cubes, this doesn't have a place really.
No, cool, completely agree. All right, let's work on to our next white card, and we have a Planeswalker. We have the Eternal Wanderer. It is 4 white for a legendary Planeswalker with no name, or with no subtype. I've just noticed that. It comes in with 5 starting loyalty, and it has the static ability: no more than one creature can attack the Eternal Wanderer each combat. It has a +1 of exile up to one target artifact or creature. Return that creature to the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of that player's next end step. It has a 0 for create a 2/2 white samurai creature token with double strike, and a -4 for each player choose a creature that player controls. Each player sacrifices all creatures they control not chosen this way. So I think this is pretty good, actually. Like 6 mana is pricey, but you're going to get your value from it straight away. It can ultimate the turn it comes down. If you're behind, then that's basically you're basically wrathing the board at that point. There will be times where it doesn't work, like against like Reanimator, if they just have one big thing in play. But I think most of the time, if you need to do that, you're going to be pretty happy with it. It protects itself really well. The 0 ability basically means that it's going to survive. As you make a 2/2 double striker, and only one creature can then attack into it. So it's probably going to trade or at least block pretty profitably. And then the +1 is nice in like a blink deck getting value, but it's also really good at getting a blocker out the way so you can swing through. And as it comes back at the beginning of the next end step, you can it's gone for your opponent's turn as well, so you can also kind of effectively blink a creature so it doesn't attack you. So you're really nerfing their best creature, so it's likely to survive. Yeah, the fact I think that this is solid in like a blink deck, and also maybe in like equipment matters deck because it does make that double striker. I think it means it could have a place. Um, if I'm honest, as this is a rare, I hope it's cheap because I think this will be really good in kind of like budget or kind of like mid-rangey style cubes. I think in kind of higher power level cubes, it might just be a bit too expensive because you're also comparing it to like the big Elspeth, which I do think is better. That also does a good job of controlling the board and also making you a board state to go ahead and win the game. But no, overall, I think it's a pretty solid card. James, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what you said. I think the modes are powerful. Yeah, Elspeth Sun Champion's card I was going to compare it to. I think Thousand to that card, the plus on that is so much more powerful, like gumming up the board in that way. The plus on this is it's it's gonna be situationally good, but like this is 6 mana. Don't need I don't. My 6 mana card should not be situational, and I think this just doesn't always come down and impact the board as much as I want it to straight away. Like, sure, the static is good at keeping it alive, but sometimes your opponent doesn't need to attack this. Like sometimes they can just attack your face, and I think this doesn't necessarily catch you up as quickly as you want your 6 drop to do. Like the -4 is good, but the fact that it leaves them with something means that and you'll have a planeswalker on 1. If you go -4, they kill your. It's assuming you have a creature to protect it. they just remove your creature, attack Elspeth, and Elspeth dies. Sorry, not Elspeth. Wandering Eternal Wanderer is the name of the card. So yeah, I would say I rate 6 mana Elspeth higher than this, and honestly, I don't rate 6 mana Elspeth that high in especially in Powered Cube anymore. I think those formats are those cubes are just so quick now that I don't know if there's really room for cards like this. But I think if you in just even a slightly lower power level cube, I think this has some powerful effects for sure. It could definitely find a home. And as you say, it goes to different archetypes. With the plus is obviously good with lots of ETB creatures. The 0 is good if you're buffing it. Yeah, I think maybe for a slightly lower powered cube, this could be a strong one.
Yeah, no, exactly. I hope this card is like a pound or two, so kind of it can just go into like budget cubes and people kind of test out there. I think it'll be quite strong in those things, but yeah, as you said, it'll be in kind of faster things. It'll get outclassed, I think.
Cool. Next up we have Kemba Car Enduring, which is 1 white for a 2/2 legendary creature cat cleric. Whenever Kemba Car Enduring or another cat enters the battlefield under your control, attach up to 1 target equipment you control to that creature. It also has equipped creatures you control have +1/+1, and 3 white create a 2/2 white cat creature token, which obviously then triggers the first ability. You can attach your equipment to it. So I think the first thing I like about this card is it has a nut draw with Colossus Hammer, which is pretty nice. You just get a 2 mana 12/12. And I think that's not a card that's in many cubes at the moment, but I think we're getting to a stage where there's enough of this effect that it maybe could be. You've got Pure Steel Paladin, you've got Sigarda's Aid. I'm pretty sure there's at least one more. Yeah, I think it's interesting, and white artifacts has a lot of overlap with equipment, and just Boros equipment is obviously a deck in quite a few cubes at this point. And I think more 2-drop creatures that really go off with equipment is exactly what those decks need. I think if you have an equipment deck in your cube, I really don't see a reason not to include this. If you don't, it's not you're not just jamming it in your mono because you have mono white and it has a few equipment in, and I don't think that's a good enough reason. But I think if you have equipment as a theme, this is really strong.
Yeah, completely agree. Yeah, I think at some point we are actually going to have to look at the Colossal Hammer. That's kind of the main note I had as well, with kind of just not being able to have 4 of. There isn't that kind of density of these cards to make Colossal Hammer a deck, or until recently that there just hasn't been. With cards like Kemba, yeah, I do think we are getting that. It might be something we have to look at.
Yeah, and this isn't a card I think that you include because of Colossus Hammer. I think it's a good card because you just have equipment. The activated ability late game, if this doesn't die, is going to be very, very strong, even if you just have 1 or 2 equipment lying around, because you're just going to create a cat. It's going to be huge. You're going to put all your equipment on it. This never has to get into combat. You rumble with that cat, they trade for it, it dies, they kill it, whatever, you make another one. It straight away, huge straight away. You're not losing your mana by re-equipping every turn. You're just creating that 1 threat, which is pretty nice. Also worth noting, there are a couple of other cats you can reasonably play in your equipment deck. There's another Kemba, which is quite strong. So you can trigger that cat ability off other cats, potentially.
I'm quickly looking what other cats. Is Savannah Lions a cat?
Savannah Lions is a cat, yeah.
Okay, there we go.
There's Leonin Shikiri is a 1 mana cat that lets you equip at instant speed. It's quite good.
What's it? Lion Sash is a cat and also an equipment.
Oh, that's pretty good.
Quite interesting. Yeah.
So you can equip Lion Sash to itself, is what you're saying.
I am, James. I am. I think we found a combo. Cool. Cool. All right, let's move on. Next, we have Staff of the Storyteller. It is 1 white for an artifact, which has, when Staff of the Storyteller enters the battlefield, create a 1/1 white spirit creature token with flying. It also has, whenever you create 1 or more creature tokens, put a story counter on Staff of the Storyteller, and pay a white and tap it to remove a story counter from Staff of the Storyteller to draw a card. So I definitely slept on this one initially. I've seen some conversations on Twitter and stuff, kind of actually comparing this to Thraben Inspector. And those are the mana you put into it to put a body down and draw a card. with Raven Inspector, you're paying a white to bring it down to get a 1/2, and you're then paying 2 mana to draw a card. With this, you're paying 1 and a white up front, so it's slightly more up front, but then you get a 1/1 spirit with flying, which is quite nice. That is a bit nicer than the 1/2 body on the ground. And then you just pay a white and tap this to remove it and draw a card. So I do love Thraben Inspector. It's one of my favorite white creatures. So the fact that this has been compared to that, I do like. The 1/2 body is good against like aggro. Like it blocks things, like it blocks 2/1s like in like other aggro decks very well, but it's not very good offensively. Whereas this has the benefit of kind of like if you do have equipment, you can buff it up with that. And also there are plenty of other token decks like this in a deck with like Rabble Masters and that kind of stuff. Like that is a decent kind of like draw engine. You're basically guaranteed to like just pay a white and draw a card every turn. I do think that is quite nice.
Yeah, for sure. No, I quite like this. It's also nice. You don't have to pay the mana when you make the token. You can store it up while you play all your aggressive cards, and then when you've got nothing else to do, you've probably built up a lot of tokens on it, or counters on this, and you can just start paying a white every turn to draw an extra card. Like, if you have this plus Blitterbossom going, for example, for a couple of turns, it's really getting loaded up. And you're not going to use it straight away because you probably have better things to do later in the game. It's just going to be a little howling mine for you. And you say the 1/1's fine body. It's like going to hold equipment well, and you can. Yeah, I think this is a nice little value card. I probably don't like it as much as Favored Inspector in like traditional mono white aggro, just because like the 1-drop slot is like you play some pretty bad 1-drops in that deck, whereas the 2-drops are quite good. But yeah, I think in like if you have tokens as a theme at all, I think this is like almost an auto include, and like I think a lot of cubes will just have enough tokens around that you can put this in and they'll be strong.
Yeah, definitely.
Cool. Next up we have Planar Disruption. It is 1 and a white for an enchantment aura. Has enchant artifact, creature, or planeswalker. Enchanted permanent can't attack or block, and its activated abilities can't be activated. So I think this is like quite an unassuming little card, but it looks like a pacifism, but this is like so much more than a pacifism. The killing activated abilities means that this will kill a Mox, this will kill a Signet, this will kill any of your mana creatures early. Plus it kills planeswalkers. And that's really powerful for 1 and a white. White doesn't tend to get to do that for less than 3 mana. You look at the cheaper white removal spells, they don't hit artifacts and they don't hit planeswalkers. And this scales up. This will stop big things as well. Like obviously there's downsides. There's downsides mostly just in terms of like passive abilities. Like they have a Nissa, they're still getting double mana from it. They have a Merfolk Lord, for example, they're still buffing all of their Merfolk. It doesn't actually remove it from play, and it is weak against Flicker. But I think just for the efficiency and the flexibility of this card, I think this goes in a lot of cubes. Honestly, I think you compare with something like Condemn seems to play. I think this is much stronger.
Yeah, no, I'd agree. Oh, yeah, I think the fact that this is a common specifically means that this of every card we talk about today, this will probably be the most played card. Like I'm not sure if it's been a hot minute since I've had a look at a Pauper Cube, but pacifism is probably still decent in that kind of format. And this is this. I was nodding along with you when you were saying like this is the best pacifism by a country mile, I think. And yeah, it's going to see a lot of play, I'd reckon.
Yeah, for sure. I like it.
Cool. All right, next up we have Phyrexian Vindicator. It is white, that's 4 whites, for a 5/5 creature Phyrexian horror. It has flying, and if a damage would be dealt to Phyrexian Vindicator, prevent that damage. When damage is prevented this way, Phyrexian Vindicator deals that much damage to any target. So, firstly, the quad white to cast probably means that it's not going to see much play. I will just get that out the way first. That is a big sink. Like even if you are doing monocolored stuff, this is still going to be hard to play because you might be playing utility lands and that kind of stuff. But I really like Stuffy Doll and like Brash Taunter style cards. I do think they are fun. I do think they add um, like cool dynamics to games, and I think they're interesting. You can definitely do a lot of cool stuff with them. They're kind of like pinging effects, and like if you land this, you're probably going to win. Like unless they have yeah, and it dies to removal. Okay, like it's a creature. It dies. But I think if there is a world where this can be cast, I think it's good. But that world is quite small. If I'm honest with you. What's your take, James?
Yeah, no, quite similar. So I agree. I think Stuffy Dolls are really cool, but thing is, this won't do most of the stuff that Stuffy Doll does because it will have killed you already. Because it will have hit for 5 in the air a couple of times and they'll be dead. Yeah, no, like I think this is it's actually a very like matchup dependent card, right? Like if you're against you're like if you're against an Esper deck, this card's horrendous. It's if you're against creatures where their removal doesn't deal damage, then this does like very little. This is like hot garbage. But if you're against red, really can't kill this in any way. It's it's an absolute nightmare for them. And even green, like this, it's not just about removal. This like blocks incredibly well. Instead of that, yeah, obviously, it's quad white. Even obviously you're only talking about mono white, but even mono white, like the utility lands are so important for that deck. Yeah, the wastelands, the ancient tombs, the strip mines. I don't think you're like, oh, I'm not going to play this strip mine because I want to run Phyrexia and Vindicator. Just like
Yeah,
play your strip mine, play your Gideon, you'll do better.
I know. I completely agree. Sometimes I do need to indulge myself just a little bit, but yeah.
No, I think it's a cool card. It's a cool card. Like a card will win some games if you put it in your deck, you know. Yeah. Next up we have Skrelv, is how I'm gonna pronounce that.
Let's go with that. Yeah. That's
Yeah, Skrelv is the line we're going with. Defector Might. It is white for a 1/1 legendary artifact creature Phyrexian Might. It has Toxic 1. I think it's the first time we've hit Toxic, so I'll read it. Players dealt combat damage by this creature also get a poison counter. So note that's 1 poison counter because it's Toxic 1. If it had Toxic 3, it would be 3 poison counters. Doesn't matter how much damage the creature deals, it just has to deal damage. Also has Skrelv Defectomite can't block, and you can pay a Phyrexian white mana, so you either play a white or you pay 2 life, and tap it to choose a color. Another target creature you control gains Toxic 1, and hexproof from that color until end of turn. It can't be blocked by creatures of that color this turn. So let's go through it. Toxic 1, unless you have like a bunch of other toxic stuff in your deck, Toxic 1 I think really doesn't matter. But we can come back to that. The tap ability, very, very powerful. Reads a lot like Protection. I think the card this would be most easily compared to is Giver of Runes, which is just a white and you just tap it to give another creature protection from a color of your choice turn of turn. I think this is worse than Giver of Runes, largely because one thing Giver of Runes does very well, which this doesn't do, is actually play defense. You can give your creature protection from a color, block a creature of that color, and your creature will win combat. This doesn't do that. It doesn't prevent damage to your creature. But on offense, this does all the things that Giver of Runes does. It does them very well. It's 2 life, which Giver of Runes isn't. You're mostly going to be paying life, I think. But but if you're aggressive enough, you can hopefully make that not matter, and later in the game you can just pay the mana. Yeah, I think we have Mother of Runes, which is better than Giver of Runes. I think Giver of Runes is better than this card, but I think this card still goes in a lot of cubes. Because the thing is, I think I mentioned it earlier, the bar is not that high for white 1-drops. Mono white needs a lot of 1-drops, and there aren't that many good ones. You see a lot of things that are Savannah Lions with really very marginal upside seeing playing cube. I'm looking at you, Dragon Hunter.
All
This
right.
is like
Right. Hold on, I'm coming in.
this is very good.
So yeah, so I agree with everything you said in terms of like the what the card does. I actually missed that it can't do it on defense. I guess when I skimmed it, I was like, oh, they're giving it unblockable and kind of hex. That's their way of getting around giving it protection because they don't want to print protection in like a standard set for some reason, that kind of thing. But yeah, the fact it can't block is a big thing. If I'm honest, this is third in terms of the tier list of them, but I think this struggles to get in over a lot of other one drops. I think if you are in a large cube like a 720 and you need redundancy in these effects, that's when this comes in. So I was going through my one drop list as you were saying, and right, yeah, all right. Dragon Hunter, not the best, but it does have a place. You do need a level of these, but like 1 mana 2/1s are getting better. Like we had a recruitment officer in the last set, which is kind of the mana sink.
Yeah, that one's quite good.
We've had Kithian for a while.
I like this quite a lot more than Kithian, I think.
Do you?
Yeah. So the other thing I like about this, right, is it can go in other decks. It's not just like there are decks that will want this and very much don't want Kithian. Like creature combo decks, for example. Like you're playing Druid combo or Persist combo or something like that, and you need to protect your combo pieces from removal. This does that. Kithian doesn't. Also, Giver of Runes and Mushroom both very good in just like blue-white tempo-y decks where you're not so much like here's a bunch of one drops. You're more like I've got some permission. I've got some like good tempo-y threats like I'm Vendilion clicking. Maybe I like top out a like Hero of Blade Hole or something. And those decks don't necessarily want a bunch of Savannah Lions, but they will use a card like this because it will help them get through removal for their threats.
No. I agree. That's true. It's just from looking at it purely from a like design point of view in terms of like putting a cube together. I think you do still you need a critical density of 1 mana 2/1s, and it's I'm just going through my own personal one drop section and kind of like you already have things like Esper Sentinel, which is like a 1 mana 1/1 that doesn't.
I mean, that one's yeah, that one's really premium.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can see Wells where you don't include it as well, just because you're like two is enough of that effect. Like you don't want all the games to be about like a Giver of Runes variant.
No, that makes sense. Yeah, like having another one is nice. Also, like the other two have gone up in price a bit. I think Mother Runes is always been because it's been reprinted is always around like a quid or two, but because of it being modern legal, Giver of Runes is like a tenner now. Like it is
Oh,
going up
really?
in price.
Yeah.
So this coming in and being cheap, this could easily be your second one if you're putting a cube together and you don't have Giver of Runes yet or something like that. I think it will still do a perfectly fine job in that kind of slot.
Yep, for sure. Also worth mentioning, by the way, it is an artifact creature. If you have a white aggressive decks that care about its artifact.
Cool. All right, let's move on. Next, we have. Oh, now I have to say its name. Skrelv's Hive. It is 1 and a white for an enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, you lose 1 life and create a 1/1 colorless Phyrexian Might artifact creature token with Toxic 1, and this creature can't block. It also has Corrupted, which is as long as an opponent has 3 or more poison counters, creatures you control have Toxic and Lifelink. So the corrupted part of it is when players have at least 3 or more poison counters, you get an additional effect. So with this one, it's creatures you control with Toxic have lifelink. So this will give your mites lifelink. Quite obviously, the most obvious comparison that this is like the white Bitter Blossom. So let's get the good parts out of the way first. Making a token every turn, we do like aristocrat decks are in white. They like that. And if you can get some poison through, giving these lifelink will negate the life loss, which can be it does eventually add up with Bitter Blossom. I can see an aristocrat deck liking this card. The main issue that I have with it is one of the reasons I like Bitter Blossom, and if I'm honest, the reason that it's still in my cube is that the flying bodies that can importantly block are really, really helpful with Bitter Blossom. On offense, they hold equipment really well. They can, if you're getting ahead, they can get in for some damage, that kind of thing. But if you're behind, like they just chump block with Bitter Blossom. You can be effectively paying 1 life to negate your opponent's best creature every turn. It just chumps blocks for days, as well as doing all of the stuff that this does for aristocrat decks. Yeah, if I'm honest, the fact that the creatures can't block is a big thing for me, and I think that's why it probably won't see as much play or anywhere near Bitter Blossom, that kind of thing.
Yeah, no, I really agree. I think especially the combination of they can't block and they don't have any evasion. Um, Imagine your opponent has a Thraben Inspector. This is not a scary card, but
Yeah.
this card looks ridiculous all of a sudden. What are you doing with your creatures? The other thing Bitter Blossom can do is even if the creatures don't have good attacks, which they normally do, it's not just that they can chump block, they can also like triple block and trade with a larger creature. This, like, if they have anything bigger than a 1/1, this does very little. And like,
Yeah.
you don't want to be at a spot where you're having to try and kill every single creature they play. And even when you give them lifelink, it's like, sure, you'll swing in and you'll gain some life, but you lose a bunch of your creatures because every creature they have will eat one. Yeah, I don't see it. I mean, I think the good thing it does is it makes sacrifice fodder. I think if you want an enchantment that says create a thing you can sacrifice every turn, yeah, this is a fine way to do it. But I think that's really the only reason to include it. Or unless I suppose you want toxic as a theme in your cube, but I think that's quite niche.
No, 100%. Completely agree. Do you want to move on to our first blue card?
Yeah, for sure. So first up in blue, we have the Blade of Shared Souls. It is 2 and a blue for a equipment artifact. It has for the mechanic 4 Mirrodin with an exclamation mark.
I really hate this name, by the
It's a
way.
terrible name, isn't it? I
Yeah.
I can't say it and not hate it.
Yeah.
Okay, but it's the name we have. I'll be referring to it as living weapon from this point forward. But for given its first up, I'll actually read the mechanic. It says when this equipment enters the battlefield, create a 2/2 red rebel creature token and attach this to it. So you play it as a creature, essentially. And unlike Living Weapon, you actually have a real creature if the equipment dies, which is nice. Also has when Blade of Shared Souls becomes attached to a creature, so that will trigger when it enters. For as long as Blade of Shared Souls remains attached to it, you may have that creature become a copy of another target creature you control. So it's a clone, and it's a clone that you can reuse by re-equipping this to another creature you control and make that a clone. I think the thing that really kills this card for me is target creature you control. That makes it so much more situational. It means, if you compare this to something like a Phantasmal Image, which is A, less mana, but B, Phantasmal Image is actually really great when you're behind. You're getting destroyed by Palace Jailer. All of a sudden, you play a Palace Jailer and exile their thing. You play they play a Gristlebrand in play. You can put a Gristlebrand in play. This doesn't do that. This only works. This is only great when you have the best creature, and those are generally not the spots where you need the help. Like, getting to reuse it is powerful, but it's still situational. It's a decent chunk of mana to re-equip it. It's not like you get to make a bunch of copies, because once you remove it from your creature, it's no longer a copy of something else. I think this is too situational. I think it doesn't do enough when you're behind. I don't really like it. What do you think?
No, I'd agree. So part of the reason I added this one, and part of it was I like the idea of a clone effect that you can Stoneforge for.
That's interesting. Yeah.
That part is quite cool and quite nice. And there is play with this one of kind of like you can make it a copy of your good creature, then attack, then equip it to something else to make or attack it with it and your good creature, attack with it, and then equip this to something else, and you have a good creature blocker.
Yeah.
I can, with all that being said, I do agree with everything said. Like it for me, like yeah, the fact it is a creature you control basically makes it like a bit win-more-y, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
That's the main drawback of the card. I think it's cool, and yeah, if this was just a tutorable clone, that would be quite cool. But yeah, there is the drawback of that, and I do agree.
No, Stoneforge is cool. You Stoneforge for this, play this, make a Stoneforge,
Second
Stoneforge for
Stoneforge,
something
yeah.
else. That's some good wheel spinning right there.
Yeah. Have you progressed the game? Sort of. Yeah.
Yeah, I've spent lots of mana, and I have another one too.
Cool. All right, let's crack on to our next blue card. We next up we have Experimental Augury. It is 1 blue for an instant. It has look at the top 3 cards of your library, put one of them into your hand and the rest on the bottom of your library in any order, and then proliferate. Proliferate means choose any number of permanents and/or players, then give each another counter of each kind already there. So, this is, I guess, just a better Impulse. Does Impulse also do 3, or does Impulse do 4?
Impulse is 4. This is an anticipate that
It's
proliferates.
Anticipate. Okay, yeah. I have a habit. I play those cards in quite a lot of decks. I like primarily in Commander, just because in Cube we do have access to more of them. Like you have like cheaper ones. You have your Ponders. You have your Preordains. The interesting part of this card is the proliferate ability. If you are in a cube that wants +1/+1 counters or wants infect, and kind of like that is a theme across the cube. Like I know I think on Arena there is the proliferate cube, that kind of thing. In those kind of environments, or specifically in a like a blue green section where you're doing kind of like miracle grows, where kind of like your creatures get counters and they get kind of bigger over the course of the game, and then you slowly build up a board state and win through. I think this could be quite good. I think it has a place. It's also a common, which is nice. Means more people will have access to it. Yeah, I think it's a solid card. I think it will struggle to get in kind of like higher powered style environments, just because there's kind of there's more efficient, cheaper options. But in the right environment, I think this could be quite cool.
Yeah, no, I agree with all of that. I think yeah, it's nice for Pop Cube. I think the thing I like about it is it's a very free instance of proliferate. You're not paying very much for this. Like Impulse is a really strong card, even in like most cubes. Like especially if there's like a decent amount of combo stuff going on, so you need one that selection. And proliferate, like you get seeing one less card, but getting a proliferate, like that is a real trade-off, but it doesn't need to do that much for you. Even just like if you have a decent chunk of planeswalkers in your deck, I think this could be like good enough. Especially putting counters on things like Narset where they don't have a plus and they just you minus them a couple of times and then they just sit there. If you proliferate onto it, then all of a sudden you get another card off your Narset. That's quite strong.
That's true. That is, and also that Narset I believe is uncommon as well. So this kind of goes in those kind of peasant cubes. So that could be quite good.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Not a flashy card, but I think like you don't need much of an excuse to put it in your cube.
No, it makes sense. All right, should we move on to our next one?
Yeah, a card you really need to justify putting in your cube, but looks very cool next up, is Ica Moon Gauntlet. It is 2 and a blue for an artifact, and it has planeswalkers you control have 0 proliferate and -12 take an extra turn after this one. So that's a planeswalker ability. It's you can remove 0 loyalty counters to proliferate, or remove 12 loyalty counters to take an extra turn. It also has whenever you cast a non-creature spell, choose a counter on target permanent, put an additional counter of that kind on that permanent. So proliferate onto one thing, basically. Yeah, this is you need a lot of planeswalkers. You need a lot of planeswalkers, I think. Unless you're I mean, you could just be in for that second ability, but I think there are better ways to do that if that's what you want. Because proliferating onto one thing is a lot less powerful than proliferating onto everything.
Yeah, we do have creatures that just do it to themselves. There's a few in green which just have that ability built into them.
Sure. Yeah. And I think the -12 is obviously like really powerful, but also most planeswalkers, if they got to 12 loyalty, of like they won the game on the -8, so it doesn't matter. So I think the 0 proliferate is probably what you need to be doing a lot with. And for that to be good, you really need like multiple planeswalkers in play, or like a planeswalker and a whole bunch of other things that are really good to proliferate onto. So that could be your opponent with poison counters, or it could be permanents with +1/+1 counters, or it could be other planeswalkers. I think this is a really cool. I think this is a cool card. I suspect it doesn't get there, but unless you have like a really planeswalker heavy cube, but I'd like to be proven wrong. What do you think?
Yeah, this is a super niche card. One of the reasons I put it on here is because Super Friends comes up in actually not really other formats. It is primarily in Commander where things can go a bit slower, but we are just seeing plenty of planeswalkers. There's plenty of cheap ones. There's support for them now. You have the green enchantment that lets all your lands tap for any color to cast planeswalkers. That's breaking modern, that kind of stuff. You have Arena Rector that when it dies goes and chooses a planeswalker, put it into play. It's
Yeah, that one's cool.
I think at some point there will be a Super Friends archetype in Cube. If there is, then this is something that you can consider. Whether we're there yet, no. I think it's the easiest way of saying that is no, we're not.
Yeah,
But
yeah. I suppose it's also interesting with planeswalkers, which have a lot of loyalty, but
mhm,
not necessarily like amazing things to do with it.
yeah,
I'm thinking like the 3 mana Kiora that comes in with like, top of my head, I think it's like 7 or something
okay.
loyalty. But it can just like -2 on tap a land. So it's like if you're proliferating, you could get that up to 12. And that's something where like that -12 is actually meaningful because that can't turn its loyalty counters into a big advantage otherwise.
Yeah, the other one I thought that could be quite cool, and this is probably way more a commander thing. There's Teferi, Master of Time.
You get to do it every turn. No, that's quite good. That's quite good.
Yeah, so the proliferating. Well, actually, it is 1-on-1, but so you're doing it 2 times a turn cycle rather than the 4 you get in commander. But
Yeah, yeah.
that is still
But I mean, the proliferate is essentially a +1,
yeah,
and
yeah,
you get to proliferate onto everything else. Yeah, that could be
yeah.
quite good.
Cool. Right, let's crack on with our next one. We have something a bit more playable coming coming up. So next we have Mercurial Spelldancer. It is 1 blue for a 2/1 creature Phyrexian rogue. Mercurial Spelldancer can't be blocked. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, put an oil counter on Mercurial Spelldancer. Whenever Mercurial Spelldancer deals combat damage to a player, you may remove 2 oil counters from it. If you do, when you cast your next instant or sorcery spell this turn, copy that spell. You may choose new targets for the copy. First up, just as a body, I think this is really solid. 2 mana for an unblockable 2/1 is just really good. Any kind of blue based tempo deck will really like this card. The bottom ability, I think, is really interesting. It definitely gets better the higher power level of the cube, the more powerful the instant sorceries you're going to be copying with this. So this is probably going to see play in Vintage Cube with things like Ancestral Recall and Time Walk. They'll absolutely love this. In those type of cubes, this is like an actually playable Seagate Stormcaller. I was very underwhelmed with that card actually when that came out, just because with Mercurial Spelldancer, it comes in on 2 and you attack with it. You kind of get some value from it straight away. And then when you draw into your spell you want to copy, you can then cash in the oil counters and do it. With the Seagate Stormcaller, you basically had to wait until you had both bits in your hand to get the full kind of value out of it. Whereas with this, I think is way better in lesser powered cubes. So in ones where there isn't power, this kind of I think compares a bit more to like Suspicious Stowaway, the 2/1 that's unblockable but loots. I think in those kind of cubes, I think in non-powered level cubes, I think I prefer Suspicious Stowaway. I like the rummaging or no, the looting effect of those kind of cards. I still think this is very good. And in lesser powered cubes, if you are doing any kind of like spell doubling style of decks, like if you're running like double vision, that kind of stuff, then I think this has a nice crossover and goes into those decks as well. So I think that could be quite cool. Yeah, I think it's a cool card. Yeah, we'll see it in the Micro Vintage Cube. I think it would be quite good there. Other cubes open to debate, but yeah, it'll be good. But I think there might be maybe some other things that kind of just pushing ahead of it. What's your take, James?
Yeah, no, I think this is a really solid card actually. Yeah, as you said, I like that you can just play it proactively on turn 2. You don't have to have anything else to do at the same time. You'll get in for damage. You start building up those oil counters. You're pressuring planeswalkers. Every spell you play you can only copy instants or sorceries, but it will get an oil counter from any non-creature. So your like Moxen or whatever in a powered cube will trigger it.
Oh, that's nice. Yeah,
Yeah, when you have something good to copy, this, unlike a lot of these sort of effects, this isn't like copy a cheap spell. This is copy any spell. So you can copy your like time warp or whatever. Um, yeah, I think this is really solid. I think it's you do want to be a deck that actually cares about the damage, I think. Like I don't think this is great for like my control deck where I want to like play it, hope it sticks around for a bit, and then maybe I get to like copy a card draw or a removal spell. I think there's like better ways to get that sort of advantage if you're not that fussed about the damage. But if you're like any sort of a tempo deck, I think this is like really quite strong.
Yeah, like this in like a kind of is it spells based deck where you're attacking with this and you're copying your lightning bolt or lightning strike, that kind of thing, just to
Yeah,
go to
for
the
sure.
face. That seems really, really strong.
Seems very good, doesn't it? Yeah. Moving on to black then. First up, we have Shieldred's Edict, which is 1 and a black for an instant. Has 3 modes. You can choose one. Each player sacrifices a non-token creature. Each player sacrifices a creature token. Or each player sacrifices a planeswalker. So, like, Diabolic Edict type stuff has seen play in cubes quite a lot. These effects normally have a lot of weaknesses, and this, I think, does a decent job of trying to make up for those weaknesses. Being that, if you're normally you can run into the issue of your opponent has Gristlebrand and Landwar Elves, and you make them sacrifice the Landwar Elves,
Yeah, that doesn't
and
feel good. Yeah.
you are not happy with your edict. And this still runs into that problem. Is the thing. It Sure, you don't get owned because they have a token, but you do get owned because they just have a bad creature that you don't care about. Um, the Planeswalker mode's really nice though, because normally they don't have a bunch of Planeswalkers. Normally they have one Planeswalker and it's killing you, and you do get to just reliably kill that Planeswalker. Um, and obviously the token thing helps. Also, sometimes getting to specify token is good. Like, they make Merit Lage. You're really happy that you can make them sacrifice Merit Lage. Um, yeah, I think, if you want to put an edict in your cube, this is the edict. I think this is the best one. Sorry, Shayna's edict, you were cool. But I still tend to think that just putting like a random Infernal Grasp or whatever in is normally better. What do you think?
No, I agree. Like, yeah, this is the best edict they printed, but that's still, I don't think, makes a playable. This reads to me super sideboardy. There aren't a super amount of planeswalkers in cube. Like the ones that are there are powerful, and you need answers for them. 75% of the time, this is in your hand. It's going to be the general edict effect. That's going to be the use case scenario most of the time. Like why I think it's sideboard is kind of like this comes in if you see like Jace the Mind Sculptor or a big Teferi or a big Khan that you have to have a way to deal with at instant speed. Then I think this comes in as an answer to that.
Yeah,
And obviously, yeah, the token of Merit Lage. If you do that, like, well done. Like, you survive. But I would just pay 1 more mana and play Hero's Downfall. Like, I think that's like. There's been like I've seen talk about this card being really, really good, and I'm open to be proven wrong about that. But there's been enough of them printed at varying levels of power, and none of them have been good enough. And I still don't think we are there yet.
yeah, yeah. It is worth mentioning the use cases for edicts which aren't new to this card but are very relevant in Cube. Things like edicts do answer stuff like sneak attack for targets really well in general. Like they sneak Emrakul, you can edict it away before it gets to attack, and that stuff's really nice. Or like Tinker for Blightsteel, it gets around all the indestructible and the protection and all that stuff. If they're if they're like a combo deck which doesn't have a bunch of other creatures, that can be a use case. But yeah, I think it is more often a sideboard card than a main deck card.
Next, we have Vran Executioner Thane. It is 1 and a black for a 2/2 legendary creature Phyrexian Vampire. It has whenever one or more other creatures you control die, each opponent loses 2 life and you gain 2 life. And importantly, this ability triggers only once each turn. So if this were to go in a deck, it would be Aristocrats. Those decks want to sacrifice creatures and use effects like this to drain out your opponents. So the question is, does this go into Aristocrats? And the answer is no.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it does. I do think it's a card worth talking about just because it's one that you can look at and just from a blank point of view think, okay, this does the aristocrat thing. It's technically a better body than most of the other drain effects. It's better than Blood Artist, that kind of thing, and it does do 2 each time. The drain is 2, but you only get to do it once each turn. That isn't good enough. I think I think you would rather play every 2 mana version, every 3 mana version of this effect, and probably the 4 mana Space Marine over this as well. What do you think, James?
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree in most of the aristocrat decks. I guess the spot where you'd want this is like I'm not all in like combo-y aristocrat stuff. I'm an aggressive deck and I'm sacrificing some stuff.
That makes sense. Yeah.
So like yeah, like maybe I have like cat oven and stuff. Or I have I'm sacrificing stuff to get through damage a lot, but I'm like, sacrificing one or two things and getting attacks in, and this kind of plays both ways because it is a 2/2 for 2. Um, but yeah, having said all that, I'm kind of off it. I think I'd still rather have, Zulapot got through it or whatever.
No, exactly. No, I agree. And like part of me did just want to like leave a card like this off because it isn't super playable. But I do think there is a conversation worth having with cards that kind of like on the face of it look like they're good. Like there's elements of this card that are really good.
Yeah.
It's a better body. The draining for 2 life is good, but I think kind of talking about the use case of it kind of helps explain just why it doesn't cut it, basically. But
Yeah, for sure. I think there's also a temptation for our players to look at stuff like this and be like, "Oh, I'm playing a creature deck. Like my creature's gonna die, right? So I'm gonna kill them." And it's like, I mean, just kill this first if that's actually a problem for them. Cool. Next up we have All Will Be One. I guess the sort of name card of the set. Which is 3 red for an enchantment. Doesn't which screams train wreck. Don't affect the board. We'll see how it
no.
goes. As for text, whenever you put one or more counters on a permanent or player, All Will Be One deals that much damage to target opponent or creature an opponent controls or planeswalker an opponent controls. So I'll admit the first time I read this card, I thought I could like play a Dark Depths and 20 them.
Yeah, I did too. Yeah.
Yeah, I did think that. It doesn't work because it enters with the counters, sadly. So what does this card do? On most boards, a whole lot of nothing. It does have a bunch of combo wins, actually. It goes infinite with basically if you can get there's quite a few cards that when you deal damage to an opponent, you put a counter of some sort on them. If you have a card that does that, you will deal a damage to them, you'll get a counter, that will deal a damage to them, you'll get a counter, you will kill them. These cards like Quest for the Pure Flame, Talon of Pain, Noxious Dealings was the one I saw, but I think there are quite a few of them. But one thing they cards do all have in common is that they're really, really, really bad. And you probably shouldn't put them in your cube just because they combo with this 5-mana
Yeah.
enchantment. Like it's kind of cool, and it would be cool to set up. I think there's like a Tyranid from the Warhammer set that does it as well, but it's also bad.
Wow, savage, James.
Yeah, it's a 5-drop. It doesn't do that much. Like, sure, you could do stuff with like persist counters and whatnot, maybe, but like you can win in better ways with your persist combos. I don't think this is worth it.
No, fair. You, yeah, I think we've definitely the dynamic of me being a bit more of the Timmy. I think shows through with me adding this one to the
No,
list.
I think it's
Yeah,
a cool card. Like, I
yeah.
want to build with it. It's going in a commander deck.
No, definitely. Like, I do think like there's plenty of counters flying around. There's plenty of stuff in like red sections. Like if you're doing like modular, there's like the white red modular stuff from Modern Horizons 2, that kind of thing. I do think that to me this is kind of like double vision in that it is a 3 red enchantment that does nothing by itself. I think there is potential for this to be cool in the right thing. Like I generally think like in Arena Cube there will be a deck for this. I think at some point in the next kind of 6 months. Like it's a new card. It's the name card of the set. I think they will try it. I'm willing to go on this journey of seeing if there's some cool stuff you can do with it. If there is, we'll find out in the Arena Cube when it comes out. If it's not in the Arena Cube, then we know it's not going to work anywhere, I think.
Yeah, I think the difference I see between this and double vision, right, is once you've played your double vision, if you're on tap with your double vision, you just need like a good spell in your hand, probably one that draws you cards, and you're like off to the races, right? Whereas with this, like Yes, there are a lot of like good cards that can like move counters about and put a bunch of counters on stuff. But you're generally talking about like multiple things in play there. You need like a whole already synergistic board of creatures. If you have that, there are normally like better ways to win the game than like 5 mana don't do anything for the rest of the time. Like yeah, if you could have like an Arcbound Ravager, for example, right? And you start sacrificing stuff, you're pinging a bunch of times. Time you do that, like that will win you the game. But did you need this to win you the game necessarily? You know?
No, that's true. Yeah. It's an extra step. Yeah. No, I think that's fair. All right, next up we have Gleeful Demolition. It is a single red for a sorcery. Destroy target artifact. If you control that artifact, create 3/1/1 red Phyrexian Goblin creature tokens. So this is effectively a reprint of called Dotha Rebirth. I'm assuming it's slightly worse because that is sacrifice an artifact. This is destroy. So technically, this can't like destroy like an indestructible land or indestructible creature, that kind of stuff. But apart from that, they are pretty much identical, I believe. Like I know that Kuroth Rebirth is quite a powerhouse in like Pauper, that kind of thing. I would imagine it has a place in Pauper and Peasant cubes. I think we've spoken about kind of like a artifacty aristocrat style thing before. This kind of bridges that gap in, I think, in lower power level cubes, because it will put an artifact in the bin to trigger some things while giving you tokens to trigger your other things. I think in like Pauper and Peasant, this not Pauper, in Peasant, this could be an interesting card. For higher power levels, Kuldotha Rebirth doesn't see that much play, so I don't think this will either. But yeah, in lower power levels, I think it's nice to have another one of these effects.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's nice for anansi. And it's also worth noting, this is also a 1 mana shatter,
That's true, yeah.
which Caldo Freebirth isn't. So the thing actually with you mentioned indestructible artifacts and tokens. You do actually get your goblins if you target an indestructible thing with this.
Oh, do you?
It will resolve, it just won't destroy it, but you will get your free tokens. So that's kind of cool. I mean, it's not necessarily like a thing worth building around, like I'm gonna blow up my Darksteel Citadel, but haha, I have my free goblins anyway. But yeah, no, I mean it does some stuff. I think it's nice that you get the utility of a shatter, which means like you don't need to as consistently have the setup for the goblins to be good.
That makes sense, yeah.
And maybe there are spots where the tokens being goblins is good for you. You can get and do some tribal stuff there, maybe. But yeah, it all seems like quite situational.
Okay, with our last red card out of the way, I think we're going to end it there. Part 2 covering the rest of the set will be out shortly, so do make sure you like, share and subscribe so you get notified when that video comes out. From me and James, you all take care, and we'll see you all soon. Goodbye.